We had a little bit of an issue with one of the mics this week. We've had the same issue for like the past 2 weeks. We're working on replacing that. So by the time, hopefully next episode or so, we should have that fixed. We're trying to figure out exactly what the issue is. We bought new cables. That wasn't it. I think it's maybe the mics or audio recorder. I ran a filter on this so that removes most of the like hissing and sort of like background noise, like kind of crackling we were getting. But you may hear it made our voices sound a little bit different, a little muffledy kind of. So just preparation. It's not bad. I think it sounds okay still. It's just not quite as good as it usually does. We will have it fixed shortly. Thank you for your patience. The end. On this prequel episode, we've got our fan reaction to The Clique. We're learning about Stanley Kubrick and previewing The Shining. Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, podcast where we talk about books that are based on movies. It's a prequel episode. It's the prequel to our Halloween episode, which this year is The Shining, which we've been waiting to do for a little while. Very popular. I believe it's been recommended several times. Mm-hmm. And we're getting to it finally. And not any specific reference. It's not a. This one wasn't a patron.
No.
Specific recommendation.
No, this was what I had scheduled for Halloween like a year out.
Yeah, we've been sitting on this one for a while. So before we get to the preview of The Shining, we've got some other stuff to talk about, including our patron shoutouts. No new patrons this week, but we do have our Academy Award winners, and they are Winchester's Never Die, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Eli Youngs, Gratch, Just Gratch, Shelby Says Black Lives and Trans Lives Matter, I Still Don't Like Twilight, but I Understand It a Lot Better, and Alina Doletkolova. Thank you all very much, as usual. You are fantastic for supporting us, and we appreciate it so very greatly, and I think we've hopefully getting to all of your recommendations in due time. We're getting there. We're working our way through them. Let's go ahead and hear what everybody had to say about our thoughts on The Clique.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
We got way more feedback for this one than I was concerned that we might.
You said that, but then I remembered seeing like the sort of numbers on social media going into the episode, and it was we were getting more interaction than I was expecting going in. So I was kind of thinking we might get more.
We didn't not lots of numbers of comments, but the comments that we did get are long.
Yes,
really, inspired some passion with this one. So on Twitter, we had a total of 7 votes. 3 of them were for the book and 4 of them were for the movie.
Pretty split.
Yeah, pretty split. Kelly Napier at Stand By for Live said, "If hard-pressed, I pick the movie. Only because I liked how Claire saved Massey from the Chris Abley situation versus just seeing parents who can't act accordingly. That being said, the book read like a poorly executed writing exercise. If it had been turned in for a grade, it would have received no more than a D, only because the assignment was completed.
Go off, then.
The ideas are unoriginal, weakly formed, and barely executed. Then the movie does itself no favors by mostly carbon copying the book and not improving where it could. Also, the book and movies are both terrible examples of how to treat any human being, let alone people you claim are your friends. As a parent of a 12-year-old, she would not be allowed to read or see this. Throw it all into the sun." This GIF directed at both formats. And the GIF was the principal from Billy Madison saying, "What you've just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I've ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul."
There you go.
Our other comment on Twitter, from Plant All the Things Irony, that's at Dark Irony, said, "First-time listener, first-time caller.
Nice.
Just finished the episode. Great listen. I have a few comments as a reader of 4 to 5 of the books in this series. I don't want to defend them as literature. just provide another perspective. The lack of plot arcs is part of the appeal. It makes the books more mindless and more escapist. They are just a world to hang out in. That's fair.
That's fair.
Yeah.
There are plenty of books like that, especially in the younger, obviously in children's books and that sort of thing. Like there's a series, and this is a different type of series, but there's a series of books by Lewis Sacker, Wayside Stories at Wayside Stories at West Side High or something like that.
Wayside Stories from Wayside School, I think.
Something like that.
So no, it's Sideways Stories from Wayside School. I had it flipped.
That's it. And there's like several books in that series. And those are like more vignettes from my memory. It's been a long... I used to like them a lot as a kid, but it's been a long time since I read them. And there aren't... But again, that's a little different, is that there aren't... Those books I don't remember having overarching plots versus like chapters that were like vignettes, kind of. But I could be wrong about that.
That kind of read on it makes me wonder if maybe what the author was going for was something more akin to a serialized, like a Sweet Valley High kind of a thing.
Yeah, or it was Babysitter's Club.
Or like Babysitter's Club, which it didn't really read that way to me.
Yeah.
But you never know.
Yeah.
Dark Irony went on to say, they're just... Nope, I already read that. Second, Massey's inability to accept sarcasm from anyone else rings so true for me because I know a Massey. My very, very alpha female cousin is a Massey, and she also cannot accept sarcasm from any other source. If someone says something funny, she gets this intense look as if trying to figure out if she's offended or not. And if you say, it was a joke, she's like, oh, okay. Could also be that she owns the joke space and no one is allowed to intrude.
Interesting.
So.
There are people like that. I will say. Yeah. I want to say that. It did strike me as odd watching it in the movie, but thinking back on it and what they're saying, I feel like I've definitely met people like that who are sarcastic but also don't get it all. Like don't realize when it's directed at them all the time. I'm sure we're all guilty of it sometimes, to be honest. But
I didn't pick up on that as much in the book as we did in the movie. Yeah. And in the movie, it maybe rang a little more false, probably because you're watching it and you're used to like certain types of interactions.
Especially in movies. Like
So thank you at Dark Irony for listening and commenting. We hope you keep listening. Over on Facebook, we had a total of 5 votes. 3 of them were for the book and 2 of them were for the movie.
So we ended up all square.
Yeah, we did. Pretty well split again there. Sarah said, this was probably a weird choice of first book/movie for me to choose to read and watch in real time with the podcast. But I have always found the mean girl gang trope to be a fascinating one, and this was a story I had not heard of before, so my interest was piqued. Ultimately, I was fairly disappointed by both the book and the movie, but I have to give
recurring theme here.
I have to give it to the movie because the writing in the book was so bad. Maybe I would have been able to overlook it if I were a middle schooler, but as an adult, it was almost painful to read. The movie, at least, ironed out a few of the pacing issues and was able to get the story's main beats across without all of the awkward narrative problems the book had. I do wish that the movie had changed the ending to make it a bit more satisfying, though I didn't expect a good ending from the book because I knew that it was only the first in a long series about these characters, but I had hoped that the movie would do better. The thing that did ring painfully true for me in both versions of the story, though, was the extremely fickle nature of the friendships between the girls. Though the nature of their popularity was very different, I have very unpleasant memories of being shunned and ostracized by the, quote, popular girls in my class once we all reached middle school, and of spending several difficult years simultaneously hating them for how they treated me and desperately wanting to be liked by them again and grasping at any crumbs of attention they would throw my way, however fleeting they were. Though the actions of the mean girls in this story were very over the top, I think the push and pull of wanting to be friends with the popular kids, no matter how badly they may treat you, is a fairly common experience at that age, and was the one thing that both the book and the movie did a good job with, despite the story's other flaws.
Interesting. I don't disagree that I think that's probably common or wanting to be and your experience sounds very familiar. I'm sure to lots of people, and myself to some facets included, or to some extent. I will say that I still, at least for me, I guess like from my experience, it was like, oh sure, I would have liked to have hung out with the popular kids maybe, but like. As soon as they would if they ever would start making fun of me, I would just leave. Like, I don't like, I wouldn't want to, like, my desire only extended so far as like, it seemed like they were interested in me being around. I don't know. Maybe obviously everybody's experience with that isn't the same.
I totally get the push pull and like the kind of love hate back and forth with the popular kids. That's not unlike what my experience in middle school was. The high school I went to was a lot bigger, so I had like way less problems in high school. There were more people to hang out with. Yeah, you can just have
your own friend group.
Yeah. I think my issue with what the books did was still that I just felt like Claire's motivations for wanting to be friends with them weren't clear.
Yeah. Other than like just to be part of the popular group. Which again, in the movie, it doesn't establish, she doesn't strike as, at least to me, she didn't strike me as that kind of character who was like desperate to be popular.
Right.
She just seemed cool doing her own thing, but then just like really wanted to be friends with these girls for some reason, which was interesting. Other than, I don't know. Yeah, it is interesting. And I don't think it's, there's definitely the fickle nature of friendship at that age is for sure a true thing that and allegiances can turn very quickly and that sort of thing. So I see what they're saying.
And our last comment on Facebook was from Dorian, who said, "So this was my Patreon pick. This was a movie my mom brought home from the video store when I was younger. She always picked movies that had girls on the cover or were animated. I saw the movie first and remember being really into that fashion and the lifestyle depicted in the movie. The big house, no school uniforms, horseback ridings, and sleepovers every Friday night really dazzled me." That's fair.
Yep.
"It never really crossed my mind how mean everyone was to Claire. I gave the book a try but never finished because it just couldn't hold my attention. I rediscovered the movie during quarantine after having a few glasses of wine."
The best way to rediscover anything from your childhood.
"During my rewatching, I felt very differently. Everyone, even the teachers, were so mean to Claire. When she shows up late to art because she's a new student at a giant school with no one showing her around, the teacher is a real dick about it. He really is."
He really is. And I think he plays a very like tropey, cliche, like gay character, like kind of over the top, like sassy gay teacher kind of character, but yeah. "I
feel like we were supposed to view Massey as being threatened by Claire, but that's only mentioned once. I went to a school from grades 3rd to 6th where the girls were awful. I think Claire was trying to do the thing I tried, where you attempt to force yourself into the mean group in hopes of removing yourself as a target. That did not work for me. Overall, the movie is not good, everybody's really mean, and the ending is not fulfilling. The thing I really wanted to talk about is that makeover scene. I always wanted a group of girls to take me under their wing and give me a beautiful makeover. I am a sucker for a good makeover scene in films. I tend to like rom-coms and teen, young adult coming-of-age films for that very reason. Those girls gave Claire a terrible Farrah Fawcett hair and a beige skirt suit. I would not have been surprised if the movie said those girls are still her enemies and they gave her a bad makeover to make her think she looks good in order to embarrass her at the party. That could have been an interesting twist, actually.
I will say, though, what year was this? 2000. This movie is 2008. Beige skirt suit, the peak of fashion, as we know from the Twilight series. Bella rocks the beige skirt.
That's fair. I did, when we were watching it, though, I did comment on her hair.
Yes,
during that scene, I was like, ooh.
What did they do to her hair?
Those bangs.
Yeah.
Because they like teased it up.
Yeah.
Which was not the style then at all. Thanks for doing this review. Please forgive how long-winded this is and any grammar errors. I decided to write this also after having a few drinks.
There you go.
That's how we decided to record that episode, so.
There you go. Fantastic. That's great. Thank you, everybody, for all your feedback. That was fun. We always enjoy hearing from you, hearing what you have to say about the movies and what we had to say about them. It is always interesting. But now, it's time for a very long-winded and meandering learning things segment. We're learning about Stanley Kubrick.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
Okay, before we get started, this is going to be an incredibly abbreviated look into Stanley Kubrick's career, with a strong focus on the filming of The Shining and some of the more controversial aspects of that event. He's one of the most prolific and written about directors of all time. I couldn't begin to do justice to his career or his shortcomings in this very brief write-up. Go out, read more, watch more. There's documentaries. It's not unfair to say that he's one of the most influential and important filmmakers maybe ever. I think easily in the top 10 probably. That being said, there's also a lot more that I didn't go into on maybe the negative side. There's all manner of things to discuss about Stanley Kubrick. And it would have this prequel episode would have been 8 hours long.
Yeah.
So
we reiterate fairly frequently.
Yes.
These segments aren't meant to be comprehensive.
Yes. So if I miss anything important that you think's important, then let us know. But I'm trying to hit some highlights and then get to some interesting stuff that I think will be interesting to talk about before we get to The Shining. So Stanley Kubrick was born in 1928 and raised in the Bronx, New York City. After graduating high school, Kubrick taught himself all the aspects of film production and directing, and he spent several years working as a photographer for Look magazine before setting out into his filmmaking career. His first few short films in the early 1950s were primarily documentaries. His very first film was a 16-minute, although on IMDb it's his second, but there's numerous sources that I saw said this was his first film. It was a 16-minute black and white documentary about the boxer Walter Cartier, whom he had photographed for Look magazine the year before. Kubrick spent $3,900 making the film and sold it to RKO Path for $4,000, which at the time was the most money the company had ever paid for a short film.
And a profit, nonetheless.
Yeah, and he made $100 on it. And Kubrick feels that he learned a lot. Well, he made a profit. When it says he spent $3,900 on the film, I assume that does not remotely take into account labor hours. So he made nothing near a profit. But yeah, but who knows? Maybe it does. Kubrick feels that he learned a lot from the project and later would declare, quote, "The best education in film is to make one." And as somebody who's both been to some film classes and worked on some movies and short films and that sort of thing, I cannot agree with that enough, that you learn so much more. Mm-hmm. It's one of those career paths where you learn infinitely more just doing the thing, especially doing the thing with people who know it, but even who know how to do it and learning from them. But even without that, just doing it and failing and figuring out what you're doing, which is true of a lot of things, to be fair. But filmmaking in particular, you can read a lot of things, but until you actually go and do those things, it's a very different world. Kubrick, after the sort of success, quote unquote, of his short documentary about the boxer, would quit his job at Look magazine and move to New York City to become a filmmaker. His first feature film was the 1953 anti-war film Fear and Desire, which received generally positive reviews at the time and actually can be watched in its entirety on Wikipedia. If you look up Fear and Desire, it's like an hour long or so. And it's interesting. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I kind of clicked through and watched some segments here and there. It's a very interesting sort of time capsule to see sort of his first attempt into filmmaking, and see some of the style, some of the finding his footwork and sort of the style. It's very similar or reminiscent of watching, although maybe even less developed, of watching something like Spaced. If you've watched all of Edgar Wright's movies like Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead and World's End and Scott Pilgrim, and then you go back and you watch the TV show Spaced, which he did several years before all of those. It's a similar thing of seeing sort of
you can
those
see
elements,
like where his personal quirks and
you can see that
points.
And they kind of developed beyond that, but you can see a little bit of that in this Fear and Desire film, and you can watch the whole thing on Wikipedia if you would like to. So Kubrick's big breakout, we're going to skip ahead a little bit here. Kubrick's big breakout success would come in 1957 with the release of Paths of Glory, a World War I anti-war drama starring Kirk Douglas, and it's based on a novel of the same name. And I think here would be an interesting time to note that many of Kubrick's works, including The Shining, obviously, which we're going to talk about, are based on novels or short stories. Diane Johnson, who co-wrote The Shining with Kubrick, said that he, quote, always said that it was better to adapt a book rather than write an original screenplay, and that you should choose a work that isn't a masterpiece so you can improve on it, end quote. Which
Savage.
Yeah, calling out The Shining there, but I do think that's actually, at least the picking stuff that's not as good to improve upon it is an interesting... It's a good idea.
I wish people would do that with movie remakes.
People joked about that for years about why don't they remake bad movies, and there are lots of reasons for that. But it is an interesting concept because if you take something that you think has a good core but maybe isn't done the best way and remake that, like remake The Clique. It's got there are ideas there. It's just. No, remake Mortal Engines. We've talked about that before, that we think Mortal Engines had a lot of potential and just didn't quite get there. And with the correct director, could have been something really cool. So we're going to skip ahead even more here, but suffice to say that Kubrick would go on to have a string of successful movies, both critically and financially, from here with Spartacus, Lolita, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Clockwork Orange, and Barry Lyndon, which brings us all the way up to 1980 and The Shining. Before we discuss Kubrick's work on The Shining, let's talk a bit about his directing technique and his relationship with actors. Kubrick is infamous for being a demanding director and a perfectionist, often requiring absurd numbers of takes for a given scene in a film. Jack Nicholson remarked that Kubrick would often ask for upwards of 50 takes while they were on the set of The Shining, and that's not just something that was special for The Shining. Infamous for just doing crazy numbers of takes.
It sounds expensive.
It is, especially at the time, it's incredibly expensive because you're rolling real film.
Yeah.
It's a lot cheaper today if you're not shooting on film, which a lot of movies still do shoot on film and then digitize it. But a lot of, a fair number of movies today shoot digitally. And if you're doing that, it's way cheaper than dumping that much film into a camera and not using most of it. There's a director who Gone Girl, who's not Chris. Is it Chris?
No, it's
Lynch. No,
David.
David, not Lynch. Oh no, I keep now. David Lynch is stuck in my head, and that's the other guy. That's no, I can't remember the name of the show. Cronenberg. No.
David Fincher.
There's so many Davids. Anyways.
Too many Daves.
David Fincher is also notorious for doing a ton of takes. Kyle from Good, Bad, or Bad Bad has talked about when he was involved on some of the Gone Girl shooting, about even on some of these like super minor little shots and scenes he was involved in. They just did dozens of takes of them, which is not the standard. So this style of doing a ton of takes was used by Kubrick as an attempt to get the actors to stop consciously thinking about their lines or their delivery or their actions and start just delivering performances from a, quote, deeper place. This was and is criticized by some in the industry as irrational and unnecessary, but Kubrick firmly believed the process created the most authentic performances. Many actors seemed to agree and loved working with Kubrick. Tony Curtis, who was the star of Spartacus, said that Kubrick was his favorite director, saying, quote, his greatest effectiveness was his one-on-one relationship with actors, end quote. Malcolm McDowell recalls long discussions he had with Kubrick to help him develop his character in A Clockwork Orange. Kubrick was also open to improvisation and input from actors. Peter Sellers especially felt that he was able to work freely during the shooting of Lolita, which he thinks was like a turning point in his career, and he credits a lot of that to Kubrick allowing him to sort of explore the role and that sort of thing on camera. But that brings us to Kubrick and his relationship with Shelley Duvall on the set of The Shining. So, much has been written about and discussed on this topic, and again, I'm not here to provide an exhaustive discussion, but I wanted to make it a point in this Learning Things segment because I think it's important to know some of the context of the making of this film so as to both appreciate and criticize it more effectively. Without sugarcoating it, Kubrick mentally and arguably physically abused Shelley Duvall during the making of The Shining. Just a little rundown list of things that have been reported and are not disputed in any way. These are like well known. He intentionally isolated her on the set and told like other crew members and stuff to like not talk to her and not acknowledge her and that sort of thing. He would cut her lines from the film unexpectedly without like giving her reasons and stuff to make her feel sort of paranoid and that sort of thing. And while famously stupid high take counts are something Kubrick is known for, this one instance, he forced Shelley Duvall to do 127 takes of the baseball bat scene, to the point where when they were done filming it, she was dehydrated and her hands were like raw and bleeding from swinging the baseball bat around. Jack Nicholson, after the fact, praised Kubrick's directing, but pointed out that he, quote, turned into a different director, end quote, when he worked with Duvall. Duvall has said of the experience a lot of things over the course of her lifetime, but this is one. Quote, from May until October, I was really in and out of ill health because the stress of the role was so great. Stanley pushed me and prodded me further than I've ever been pushed before. It's the most difficult role I've ever had to play. And she famously showed Kubrick clumps of her hair that had fallen out due to the stress of the role. Now, there are some people that may argue that the ends justify the means. Duvall's performance, while panned at the time, she was actually nominated for a Razzie, which, boy... I think, I haven't seen the movie in years, but from it's been several years, but the last time I watched it, I find her performance captivating and dynamic, even if her character is a little bit one note, and we'll get into that a little bit more, obviously, during the episode. And I will agree that there are times when great art can take sacrifices, but I'm firmly of the opinion that those should only be sacrifices on behalf of yourself. I might give up a night's sleep to finish a project that I'm deeply invested in, but I'd never force someone else to. Here's my take. Good art doesn't require abuse, and anyone who tells you otherwise is either a shit artist or an abuser. So all this isn't to say you can't enjoy The Shining or Duvall's performance. Hell, even Duvall has positive things to say about the film, Kubrick, and her experience making the film. But it's important to consider what went into making of the film and to redress your feelings about it appropriately.
Well said.
Man. Okay. Let's go ahead and learn about The Shining, the book.
I don't suppose they told you anything in Denver about the tragedy we had up here during the winter of 1970? I hired a man named Charles Grady as the winter caretaker. And from what I've been told, I mean, he seemed like a completely normal individual. But at some point during the winter, he must have suffered some kind of a complete mental breakdown. He ran amok and killed his family with an axe.
Well, you can rest assured, Mr. Ullman, that's not going to happen with me.
That's right.
So The Shining is a 1977 horror novel by one Stephen King. We're now several books deep into Stephen King's catalog. It is his third published novel and his first hardback bestseller. The success of The Shining pretty firmly established King as a prominent author in the horror genre. So after writing Carrie and Salem's Lot, which were his two novels preceding The Shining, both of those were set in small towns in his native state of Maine. King was looking for a change for his next book. He said, I wanted to spend a year away from Maine so that my next novel would have a different sort of background. Now, allegedly, King opened an atlas of the United States on the kitchen table and randomly pointed to a location, which turned out to be Boulder, Colorado. King and his wife Tabitha checked into the Stanley Hotel in nearby Estes Park, Colorado, into room 217. And according to King, the hotel was...
A terrible documentary, by the way.
What?
There's a documentary called Room 217.
Oh, is there?
That is about The Shining and specifically like the conspiracy theories that have cropped up around The Shining and like the moon landing hoax and stuff. It's not that the documentary is necessarily terrible, but the subject is maddening to me because it's all like conspiracy theory nonsense. But anyways, sorry, continue.
So according to King, when they went, the hotel was getting ready to close for the season, and they were the only 2 guests, which sounds terrifying.
Or great. Especially because you're not stuck there all winter. If you're just there as a guest for like a week.
For like a weekend,
that could be fun.
Hotels are too big.
That depends.
It's too big.
I think it could be fun.
It's too much space.
I think it could be fun.
How can you possibly be aware of so much space at once? You can't.
What do you mean be aware of? I'm just a guest there. I'm just gonna I'm gonna go to my room. I get to be the only one in the pool and hot tub. I think it could be fine.
Would you be in the pool in October in Colorado, though?
Well, if it's an indoor pool.
I guess.
Which it probably would be if it's in Denver. But anyways.
I guess.
I don't disagree that it would also probably be creepy and weird, but I wouldn't want to do it like they do in the movie for months or whatever.
Yeah.
But
of that experience, King would later state, "That night, I dreamed of my 3-year-old son running through the corridors, looking back over his shoulders, eyes wide, screaming. He was being chased by a fire hose. I woke up with a tremendous jerk, sweating all over, within an inch of falling out of bed. I got up, lit a cigarette, sat in a chair looking out the window at the Rockies, and by the time the cigarette was done, I had the bones of the book firmly set in my mind." And that first draft of The Shining took less than 4 months for King to complete. Originally, there was a prologue to the book titled Before the Play that chronicled some earlier events in the Overlook's history, as well as an epilogue titled After the Play, although neither of those original elements remained parts of the final published novel. The Shining was also heavily influenced by Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House.
Is that the one that the Netflix show is based on?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. Edgar Allan Poe's...
He's like the Attorney General, Edgar Allan Poe.
Edgar Allan Poe's The Mask of the Red Death.
That's when there's a murder of them. You have Edgar Allan Poe. When there's numerous Anyways, sorry.
And The Fall of the House of Usher. And Robert Marasco's Burnt Offerings. The story has often also been compared to Guy de Maupassant's story, The Inn.
That was very good French pronunciation, or relatively
Or
good.
very bad. I'm not really sure.
It was close. Close.
I had to look up that one and make sure.
Poisson. Probably a little more nasal at the end there, but whatever.
Yeah. Bill Thompson, who was King's editor at Doubleday at the time of publication of The Shining, actually tried to talk him out of publishing it because he thought that if you followed Carrie and Salem's Lot with yet another horror novel, that King would get typed as a horror writer. King considered that a compliment.
He was like, "Do you know who I am?"
I hope he actually did. Like, did you know who I am?
Look at me. Who do you think you're talking to? All right. Those are some fun facts about the book. Let's go ahead and talk about the movie.
I fear you will have to deal with this matter in the harshest possible way.
I do that. I killed you and Danny.
You did this to him, didn't you?
I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains. Here's Johnny.
The Shining is a 1980 film directed by Stanley Kubrick and written by Kubrick and Diane Johnson. The film stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Danny Lloyd, and Scatman Crothers. The film is 84% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, has a 66% on Metacritic, and is movie number 63 on IMDb's Top 250. It might be the first or one of the first. I would have to go, but Gone Girl, I believe, is on that list of like IMDb's top. This is their fan.
Oh, yeah. I feel like we've had at least one other one that was on
I'm fairly
that
certain
list.
Gone Girl's somewhere on that list, and I'm sure there have been others. But, Lord of the Rings movies are all on there. All three of them are somewhere on there.
Yeah. I'm sure The Princess Bride is.
Yes. So there's been plenty.
Yeah.
But my point being, it is number 63.
And
so
pretty high.
yeah, that's fairly
on the
high.
list, yeah.
Princess Bride's probably actually higher. Princess Bride's probably like top 25, I would bet.
Oh, Princess Bride is beloved by
It's a
everyone.
crowd pleaser,
Yeah.
so it's, yeah. The film had a budget of $19 million and ended up grossing $46.2 million. I don't know why I include that every time, but I do, so deal with it. The film opened to mixed reviews in 1980, and I've got some reviews here that I thought were very interesting. Janet Maslin of the New York Times lauded Nicholson's performance and praised the setting of the Overlook Hotel for being a great horror setting, but wrote, quote, "The supernatural story knows frustratingly little rhyme or reason. Even the film's most startling, horrific images seem overbearing and perhaps even irrelevant." End quote. Variety was also critical, saying, "With everything to work with, Kubrick has teamed with jumpy Jack Nicholson to destroy all that was so terrifying about Stephen King's bestseller." And then this last review I thought was interesting. It's from Vincent Maiciano in Aries Magazine, which is like a gaming magazine, like a Dungeons and like a tabletop game. I think it doesn't matter.
So a nerd magazine.
Yeah, I think it was like a nerd magazine. And his concluded his review with, quote, "The Shining lays open to view all the devices of horror and suspense, endless eerie music, odd camera angles, a soundtrack of indeterminably pounding heart, hatchets, and hunts. The result is shallow, self-conscious, and dull. Read the book." End quote. I didn't have any notes about it here, but obviously, subsequently, the film has been much more critically acclaimed.
Remembered much more fondly.
It is, yes, remembered much more fondly in retrospect, and it's one of those films that people generally, critics have come to. I didn't put it in here, but Siskel and Ebert both also gave it very bad reviews and were like less than 2 stars. I think Ebert gave it 2 stars, and one of them gave it like 1.5 or something. So like on the lower end. But yeah, since then it has grown in terms of sort of critics' appraisal, and it's one of those movies that's kind of cited as being maybe a bit ahead of its time, or maybe not even ahead of its time so much as just misunderstood at its time, potentially.
It would be interesting. I wonder if I could find if somebody's done like a deep dive on when that turnabout happened and maybe what the reason for that was, because there are plenty of movies that get panned and then people just forget about them.
Yeah, forget about them. Yeah, I don't know. It's there. That's a whole. There's a whole lot you could write a thesis on something like that.
So if you've written your thesis about
on The
that,
Shining and why it became a critical
let
darling,
me know, because I'd like to know.
Yeah, a lot of times, at least, what prompts the sort of readdressing of those things is like a re-release on like DVD or something, or VHS.
Video.
Yes, a home video release is when that happens, but that doesn't necessarily explain why it then becomes a positive, but a lot of times it's a re-release at a time something has changed in the cultural milieu at the time where it's been. So a movie came out in 1980, and maybe it got a home release on video in the early 90s or whatever. I don't know. I'm making this up. But something, there was some shift in the culture between 1980 and 1994
that caused people to
reevaluate it. And that's a thing you can write your your doctoral thesis on if you want to. So speaking of the book, Stephen King notoriously hated this adaptation, saying, quote, "Although Kubrick made a film with memorable imagery, it was poor as an adaptation."
I'm so excited.
And that it turns out that it was he hated it so much, it is the only adaptation of his novels that he could, quote, remember hating. So apparently before this, they're all like at least passable. Like he was like, fine. King would then go on to say in 2013 King would then go on to say in a 2013 interview, and this is something I kind of touched on briefly earlier, that Wendy is, quote, "one of the most misogynistic characters ever put on film." He would go on to explain that she is, quote, "basically just there to scream and be stupid, and that's not the woman that I wrote about," end quote. So he did not like the portrayal of Wendy in the film. And from my memory, her characterization, not the best. Performance has its merits, how that performance was achieved, not good. So it's a real.
That was a very succinct breakdown.
It's a real roller coaster. Yeah, it's a real roller coaster. And also, I will say this too: I'm not a person that believes that in order for that performance to have been achieved, that you needed the like. There's no the difference between take 20 or whatever, take 15, like a normal number of takes, and take 137.
It was 27.
120. Yeah, 127. There's
Yeah.
There's no way we gained that much. I could be wrong, but I would severely doubt it.
I feel like the quality would degrade.
Well, and that's what he's attempting. Like you can, like that's what he's going for, is because the performance in in certain scenes like that, he was looking for it to be completely like unhinged and like
sure.
So like, you know,
sure. But also,
yeah. But also, don't do that. Don't do that to people. It's not cool.
Suffer for your art. Don't make other people suffer for your art.
Yeah. So, in fact, King hated the film so much that he would go on to write and produce his own TV miniseries of The Shining, which somebody mentioned on Twitter, asking us which one we were doing, which movie. And I was like, well, there's only one movie. There's a TV miniseries that's 4.5 hours long. So we're not doing that one. And it was made in 1997.
I didn't realize there was a miniseries. So that person tweeted, and I was like, hey, we got a tweet asking which movie we're doing.
Yeah. And I was like, well, I'm pretty sure there's only one movie. I was like, I bet there was like a TV show. And I went and Googled. I was like, yeah, there was a miniseries, which makes sense. Because a lot of King stuff gets done as miniseries.
Yes.
Like, that's pretty common. Yeah. So I was like, I bet there was a miniseries. And that's what it was. So now, some fun facts from IMDb. The idea for Danny Lloyd, who plays Danny, the son, to move his finger while he was talking as Tony was, in fact, his own idea. He did it spontaneously during his very first audition. Also, by the way, IMDb fun facts, take these all with a giant grain of salt. For the scene in which Jack breaks down the bedroom door, the props department built a door that could be easily broken. However, Jack Nicholson was apparently a volunteer fire marshal at one point in his life, and so he destroyed the door way too easily when it was a prop door, so they had to switch back to a stronger normal door for him to chop through, so it looked more realistic.
I bet he felt like $1 million. I bet he felt so sexy.
Slammed that axe through the door and it just like obliterated.
Destroying this door.
Yeah. So apparently there were so many, and we talked about how, I didn't get into it too much, but Kubrick was also a fan of like kind of improvising and adapting scripts. The script was like the first draft, and then you found the final draft during the filming. Mm-hmm. So like scripts changed a lot, and Jack Nicholson noted that during filming the script changed so much that he literally stopped reading it, and he would just read only the new pages that were given to him each day. Like he
That's
wouldn't.
fair.
He was like, "I'm not. It doesn't matter. I'm tired of memorizing my lines and then having them be completely different when I get to set." So the infamous snowy maze scene at the end of the movie consisted of how they created the snow, 900 tons of salt and crushed styrofoam. Which,
well, that sounds environmentally conscious.
Seems, yeah, interesting. So, according to Vivian Kubrick, in her making of book, I didn't look into what this is, and I don't know I believe that's his wife, but I'm not positive. Stanley Kubrick's secretary spent weeks, if not months, typing all of the pages that say all work and no ploy makes Jack a dull boy, for the scene in the movie where Wendy's like finds all these pages and is rifling through them, and they all say like she thinks he's been writing his novel, and they all just the same line over and over again. And it's one of those things. It's like, oh yeah, 1980, and you know, printers existed, but they weren't nearly as prolific. And yeah, apparently she spent quite a bit of time typing up.
I guess we couldn't photocopy them. Had to be authentic.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Photocopy existed.
Yeah, it did, but I guess it needed to look authentic because he is using a typewriter in the movie.
Yeah,
so I assume that they wanted it to look. I guess a photocopy wouldn't have. I don't know. Oh, again, Stanley Kubrick's crazy, so you could probably
at least some of them. But sure.
And finally, the MPAA would not allow blood to be shown in any trailers. Or at least any trailers that would be seen by like audience of all ages. Mm-hmm. Like you would have to get like a red band trailer basically to show blood. You know, the one where it's green at the front. It says this trailer's been approved for all audiences or whatever. If you want that kind of trailer, you can't show blood in your trailer. And apparently Kubrick persuaded them that the blood during the infamous the infamous blood elevator scene was in fact not blood but rusty water, and this got the trailer passed so that it could be played as a Green Band trailer, which I thought was interesting.
Oh God,
that was funny.
Is that still the rule? Do you know?
I have no idea if that's still the rule. Yeah, I don't know what the difference. Like, I bet it's slightly different. You could probably put a little bit of blood, but maybe not an elevator full. I don't know. I don't have any idea. All right, that was all I had about The Shining, the movie. But before we wrap this up, we're going to tell you where you can watch it. As always, check your local library. Or if you still have a local video rental store, check with them as well. Shining is something that would probably likely be at the library.
Yeah.
They'll probably have several copies. It's one of those like Criterion collections. You know, you could probably find it at your library. If you have an AMC Plus subscription through Amazon Prime, you can watch it there, which we do not. So we're going to have to just rent it probably. If you have AMC through any cable TV or like a satellite provider or anything like that. So it's on AMC basically.
Yeah.
Anywhere you get AMC or AMC Plus, you can probably watch it or, record it, that sort of thing. You can rent it from YouTube, Google Play, iTunes, or Vudu for $3.99. Or if you have Sling TV or Fubo TV with a premium subscription, and that may be a premium subscription that adds AMC or something like that.
I would
AMC
think
Plus,
so,
probably. Yeah. You can watch it there. Or finally, Philo with a subscription, whatever that is, whatever Philo
I
is.
don't know what
I think we've had it on here once before or twice before. We just go to one of those like where can you stream it websites and then pull all the places it says. So these are all in America, by the way. So if you're in Canada, you're shit out of luck.
I think both April and Shelby said that they usually rent through YouTube.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
There you have it from two Canadians.
Two Canadians. Wow, we have two of our greatest fans, our best listeners are both Canadian. We got a big Canadian contingency in the This Film Is Lit fan base. That's going to do it for this prequel episode. Yeah. Sweet. Until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, everybody else.
Keep reading books.
Keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.